Hi again, everyone. I'm here today with Paul Levy, who's a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence. He is a wounded healer in private practice, assisting others who are also awakening to the dreamlike nature of reality. Among his books are The Quantum Revelation, A Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality, and Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. He's also the founder of the Awakening in the Dream community in Portland, Oregon, an artist deeply steeped in the work of C.G. Jung, and Paul's been a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for over 35 years. He was the coordinator for the Portland Padmasambhava Buddhist Center for over 25 years. And his website is awakeninthedream.com. Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, yeah, I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you.
I am so excited about your book. We're here to discuss the quantum revelation today. Interesting subject, quantum physics, as you well know.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your book a quote by Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who questions if it's even possible to speak of experts in a field that nobody understands, where they literally do not know what they are talking about. So if you had to, under penalty of something really terrible, describe what quantum physics is to someone who doesn't know in 3 or 4 sentences, what would you say?
Sure. Yeah, no, totally. And so first off, I'm not a physicist at all. And so quantum physics, it's considered the greatest discovery ever in all of history in the realm of science. That there's not a debate about. The controversy is, what does it mean? And quantum physics, from my point of view, has empirically proven that this is a dream, that we're having a collective dream. And it's unlocking the most unimaginable creative energy that's intrinsic to our nature. And so if I could really just go into, just in a simple, succinct way, really describing what I mean when I say that. So before quantum physics came on the scene, in the 100 years ago, more or less, the classical physicists, they conceived of this universe as objectively existing separate from us, and we were just the passive observers trying to understand how the universe worked. Then along comes quantum physics, and it empirically proved beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt again and again that there is no objective universe, that's just an idea that only exists inside of our mind, that with no correlate to reality. And so that's the rabbit hole that I go into. So there are all these ways of unfolding that. One way of understanding that is that the act of us in each moment observing the universe actually influences the universe that we're observing. Now, just think about that. That's a precise description of a dream. That in a dream, if we change the way we're viewing the dream has no choice but to spontaneously shapeshift and reflect back the change in our viewpoint, because the dream is nothing other than a reflection of the very mind that's observing. Okay, so quantum physics, actually, by discovering that the act of observation is not passive, but we're participating in the evocation of the very universe that we're observing, that is to say that the act of observation is creative. Okay. And so when you have the realization of that, it unlocks everything, because then you begin to realize, oh my God, we all have this enormous creative power inside of us that we're wielding every moment, as far as how we're creating our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. But to the extent we don't know that, we're holding it and carrying it and implementing it unconsciously in a way that then is getting enacted destructively. And when the majority of our species is playing that out on the world stage, like we see all around us today, we're destroying ourselves. And so what I'm pointing out is that quantum physics is the medicine for the madness that ails our species, because in essence, what the malady that we're suffering from, and I've written all these other books about that, is that we are by our nature creative beings, that's intrinsic to our original true nature. But to the extent that we're not conscious of that, like I was suggesting, that creative energy gets turned against us in a way that's destroying us. And what that implies is that the solution to all of our multiple world crises is to actually, or is for enough of us, and it has to start with the individual, to tap into our creative genius, our creative agency, and to actually plug into that creative source that is not separate from us, and to channel it constructively. And when there's enough of us who wake up to that and connect with each other, we can change the world. And that's not new agey magical thinking, woo-woo thinking. That's actually what's being presented to us. And quantum physics is actually this treasure. And I can talk about that, what I mean by that. And it's basically pointing out that we're participating in our evolution. And it behooves us to do that consciously, because if we're not conscious of it, we're going to continue to destroy ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. That you've just so beautifully described the principle of mentalism for my Hermetic students out there listening. The creation is not a switch we can turn off. We are continually doing it,
Right.
whether blindly or consciously. Yeah. This
Right.
is,
Exactly. Yeah.
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 So this, you mentioned that you've gone through the looking glass to the point of no return. I know a little bit about what that feels like. And you believe also that this is a subject that everyone should fall into. So how
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
is it that we all, or at least a critical mass, go past this point of no return? How important is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think about there was Albert Einstein, who was one of the founders of quantum physics, but he was so freaked out. It's such a radical discovery. I mean, we're still in the beginning stages of really trying to unpack what it's showing us. And even though he was one of the discoverers, he was so freaked out by what quantum physics was showing to us, he could never embrace it. He could never wrap his mind around it,
Mm,
um, because he was still attached to that there was an objective world out there separate from us. That
sure.
was the obscuration for him. I mean, it's clear from what he said. It's not just a theory, but he actually, one thing he did say, he said, quantum physics is so uncommonly important, it should be everyone's concern. Okay. And other quantum physicists are saying it's like a tragedy that not more people are tuned in to what quantum physics is actually offering us. Because the thing is that, people can get intimidated thinking, oh, it's really esoteric and complicated and all this math. And like I said, I'm not a physicist. If I were, I have a million quantum physics books, but if anyone has equations, if I came across it, I wouldn't buy it, because that's not my thing. I was more interested. At a certain point, I began having these experiences in my life where it was as if I had snapped out of a spell, the spell of consensus reality.
Mm,
And all of a sudden I was in this other universe. It was like I had a quantum jump instantaneously from one universe where certain things were impossible, and the next moment I was in another universe that looked just like the same one,
mm,
but all these other things that were impossible in the first universe were happening on a regular basis. And then I, over the years, came across quantum physics. And the more I went down that rabbit hole, the more I had the realization, oh my God, this is precisely describing this world, this new world that I had fallen into. And so that's why I became so interested in what is it actually showing us? And yeah, so I can't say enough about how profoundly important. As a matter of fact, just to give you an example, some of the other quantum physicists, there's one of them who says something like, yeah, when I get really down and depressed, there are two things that I go to. One is like, listen to Beethoven or something. The other one is quantum physics. So it's the best antidepressant there is. And a lot of the other quantum physicists, and keep in mind, they're still at the beginning of unpacking. It's like this unbelievable, this mana, this gift from heaven has just been freely given to us, and we're at the beginning stages of unpacking it. And what a lot of the physicists are saying is like it's already quantum physics has already changed the history of the world with all the new technologies and computers and with atomic energy and transistors, on and on and on. But that's the low hanging fruit. That's less than 1% of the gift that quantum physics is offering us, because quantum physics is basically pointing out that the physical world is in a way interconnected and interpenetrating and not separate from our minds. And
Mm,
that's what I mean when I say it's showing us the dreamlike nature. And yeah, so it's so unbelievably important, and it's honestly it's like a psychedelic when you take in some sort of plant medicine or something, and but it just continues to come on more and more and get stronger and deepens your insight and
mhm,
expands your consciousness. The more you're able to take in what it's showing us. And yeah, so to answer your question, I can't say enough good things about how important it is for everybody to really, even the layperson who doesn't have any science, that's me, to
mhm.
take in what quantum physics is really offering us.
Well, and relative to that, one of your quotes in the book is the study of the universe and the study of consciousness are inseparably linked, and that ultimate progress in the one would be impossible without progress in the other. You want to talk a little bit, you touched on that, talk a little bit more about that. How is that so?
Yeah, well, because what quantum physics, just by going back to the act of the act of observing actually influences the universe observed, so that our consciousness is not separate from the seemingly physical matter that we're observing.
Mhm,
That the two, you see, in a quantum world, and quantum physics started out as the study of like what is the building blocks of this universe, what is the microstructure of what this world is made of. And what they found, well, they didn't find anything. They didn't find any physical building blocks, but they found at the bottom of it was consciousness. But they also found that this universe is quantum on every scale. It's quantum through and through. So not just the smallest parts of the universe are quantum,
mhm,
but on every scale. This is a quantum world, and a quantum system has no separate parts. Okay, it's a whole system.
mhm,
And so it's very profound when you begin to take in the realization that if there's no objective cosmos out there, and that somehow the way we're observing it is influencing the very cosmos we're observing, and that our consciousness that's observing it is not separate from the stuff that we're observing, having that realization can only open up our mind and expand our
mm,
mind to the dreamlike nature of the universe. And that's the doorway. Going through that doorway, like I was suggesting, that unlocks, like the when they discovered like atomic energy and they unlocked the power of the atom,
mhm.
that's minor, that power, compared to unlocking the creative energy that each of us have inside of our psyche. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, and if I could just say another thing, because I
Mhm,
keep on thinking that I have to remember to say this. So as you can see from in back of me, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner,
mhm,
and the tradition I do practice to, it's actually how it keeps itself fresh over the centuries,
mhm,
how it just continues to propagate itself in a pure way. It's through this notion of treasures, of hidden treasures, and the actual word is terma, okay? And what these hidden treasures are planted, are hidden within the multidimensional fabric of the universe, including our mind. And then at a certain point, when like the community of practitioners gets a little bit off balance or they need something, all of a sudden the person whose fate it is to discover the hidden treasure will spontaneously, they'll find this treasure, and it might be this blessed object or a practice to do or a prayer or a teaching. And then it's very, very interesting. The person whose fated to discover that treasure, they really can't share it until they've done whatever the teaching or the practice or the prayer, and they've accomplished, they've had the realization, and then they're the carrier of the terma, and then they're able to transmit it and turn other people on. And now keep in mind, this isn't a fairy tale. This is like, scholars study this. This is a real thing.
Sure.
And one way to understand it, just being like a dream, think about when we have a dream at night. If I'm off balance and get one-sided, I'm going to go to sleep, and my unconscious is going to present, whatever the dream is, and there's going to be a symbol, and the symbol is a compensation. When I actually recognize and get into resonance with the symbol, it actually brings me back to myself. So the thing with these hidden treasures, they're very much like that. They're compensations. When you see this universe as a dream, it's like, oh yeah, when our species gets off balance, all of a sudden the universe will unfold itself in the form of these hidden treasures. Well, how come I bring up the idea of hidden treasures? Is that in my work, I'm presenting the idea that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a hidden treasure. Now I have to be careful. I don't want to like do like an appropriation, because Tibetan Buddhism, they have like, a very strict way of discerning if something's a real terma, hidden treasure or not. I'm not saying this is a terma in the Tibetan Buddhist way. I'm saying everything I know about the terma, the hidden treasures in Tibetan Buddhism, and everything I know about quantum physics, as best as I can tell, quantum physics is an analog it's a modern day terma or hidden treasure that's come into the world 100 years ago and into our minds
Mhm.
as a way of helping us to remember who we are, to remember our creative agency and our creative power. And then just one final thing, and I can go on and on about that, but the point is that not just quantum physics is a terma. Being that this is a collective dream, which is what quantum physics is showing us as a terma, then maybe a lot of other things. Maybe this universe is chock full of these hidden treasures, and if we have the eyes to see, we can discover them. Because the thing about these hidden treasures, they're not just meant for the one person who discovers them. They're designed by the enlightened mind, which is the source of the treasure, to be shared. You know. So it
Really,
just
really.
becomes a really amazing contemplation.
Wow. So through your study of quantum physics, you mentioned that your life has stopped making sense in one way and is making deeper sense in another. Do you see that? Do you see this place that you're in, or that, and maybe you're not still there, but as a bridge kind of between a previous paradigm or something that you previous believed and somewhat understood, or at least we like to think we understand. We really don't.
Right.
And this new paradigm that's much more expansive, awe-inspiring, and beyond words or thoughts.
Yeah.
Is that a fair
Yeah.
analogy?
Yeah, that's perfect. In a sense, like one way of really understanding quantum physics in a very simple way.
Hmm.
So they've found, the most elementary particles are these quantum entities. And these quantum entities are really interesting because they don't exist in objective form.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, before the moment that we observe them, they exist in a state of potentiality. Any and every possible state they could ever possibly exist in, they're existing in potential in those states. And then somebody comes along and observes that quantum entity and all those potentialities, and it actualizes into one particular form in 3D space and time. And all the other possibilities, they just disappear into a parallel world or as if they never existed.
Hmm.
Okay. And that process is happening each and every moment. But here's the thing. What that means is that even if one of those possibilities of that quantum entity, even if one of them is to quote a physicist, highly ridiculously unlikely, it could still be the one that manifests this very moment.
Mm.
Okay. And so the point is to bring it down to, to third dimensional space time. the fact here, we as a species, I don't think anybody would argue that things are dark. This is a dark time and we're destroying ourselves. We're
Mhm.
killing each other. We're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of our planet, of ourselves. And yet there is a possibility that our species might actually awaken before we destroy ourselves. And, and that's a whole other story, like what that would look like, how many people need to awaken, what will we do and all that. But
Mhm.
that's within the realm of possibility. And quantum physics comes in and says, yeah, that's, even though that seems like it's highly ridiculously unlikely,
Mhm.
that could be this very next moment. And if you're not envisioning that, then
Mhm.
what are you thinking? Then by thinking, if you get caught by pessimism or despair or depression, quantum physics, by pointing out the nature of the dream, would actually shed light on, oh, if you're holding, for example, this pessimistic point of view, oh, we're doomed and it's hopeless and I'm helpless, being
Mhm.
like a dream, the universe has no choice but to spontaneously shapeshift and reflect back your viewpoint and offer all the evidence to you that you are helpless and hopeless and you are doomed. And then you have the proof confirming your viewpoint. And then, of course, that makes you more fixed in your viewpoint. And the more fixed in your viewpoint you are, the more the universe is going to reflect that back. It's a feedback loop
Mm.
whose origin is your own mind. And what I just described, and it's easy to see that when you have in like a dream at night, you can really explore that if you have awareness. But what I just described, that's this genius. That's that incredible creative power that all of us have. To the extent we don't know we have it, it's being turned against us in a way that's killing us. And quantum physics comes along and is showing us this, is literally like revealing our creative genius to us if we have the eyes to see.
Mm. Beautifully said. It made me remember years and years ago, I had this experience. I've had others since then that were different, but the first experience was my purse got caught in a fast moving train in the door when I was leaving. The door shut on my purse and it was over my head, wrapped around my shoulder. I had this moment of complete fear. I didn't, it was just this instant. And i saw um I saw the universe, and I saw all these bubbles floating, just millions. I could see them at once, of these potential realities, potential that maybe had nothing to do with where I was in that moment. Maybe they were 10,000 years ago, maybe they were in the future, but they were just millions and millions. And I realized in that moment, I mean, it was so clear to me that, oh, I just, it's the bubble that we look at. That's the bubble that, that becomes real. And so of course it changed me for a while. And then you have this tendency, because you live in this world, this illusory world, you have this tendency to kind of forget, or to not embody that. It takes mindfulness. It's continual. It's
Well, yeah, yeah. And that's why in Tibetan Buddhism, they'll talk about, oh, yeah, no, these are habitual patterns that are really strong, because it's not just in our life, it's lifetimes that it's been ingrained,
sure.
So you have to do practice in the sense, same thing in a dream. In a night dream, it's not that hard to recognize you're dreaming, to
Mhm.
recognize the nature of the circumstance you're in. But then it's easy to sort of at a certain point forget and get absorbed back in the forms of the dream. So the idea is to have the lucidity and to stabilize that.
Mm.
And one of the things that really supports that in Buddhism, they talk about the community, the Buddha Dharma and Sangha, the teacher, teachings, and the community of fellow beings who are on the path, who are awakening. That when you hang out with other people who are also awakening, we can all, like, in a way, what I call conspire to co-inspire each other. It's a real conspiracy theory. We
Mhm.
can actually dream ourselves into an awakened state.
Mm.
And by having the recognition of our nature, and then of course we see that reflected through each other. And to the extent that I see your wholeness and your, true nature, that maybe creates a bridge that makes it easier for you to step into it. And the more you embody it,
Mm.
then the more you're able to see me in that way. So it's actually a win-win, where we're like actually, in a reciprocal way, helping each other to stabilize our awakening. And so that's really profound. And the Buddha himself said, yeah, that's one of the gems. That's one of the supports, one of the jewels of how to awaken is to hang. He says, don't hang out with fools. That
Mm.
was, in the sutras, the idea when you hang out with people who are really asleep and sort of, kind of in the materialistic sort of, state of mind, it's contagious and it
Mhm.
makes you forget. But when you hang out with people whose heart is open, who are cultivating awareness, who have the recognition of the dreamlike nature, that's contagious too. And then a field gets conjured up where you're able to just continually, to inspire, to deepen each other's awakening, you know.
Right. So you another quote in your book is the response that's required of us just in the discovery of quantum physics will irrevocably change us as a species. We can no longer hang on to what we've come to know as reality. I mean, that's your
Yeah,
that's your stance, and a lot of people's stance at this point, mine as well.
yeah.
Through your study of quantum physics, um, have you been able to, we've talked about correspondence, or the principle of correspondence as I know it, and the as within so without, and the mirrored realities that we have. One of those teachings is also that from the known we can understand the unknown. And I wonder, in your study and your exploration over the years, have you drawn on something that you know, a subject that you know, and placed it on this unknown in order to make more sense of it? Or is that something that you maybe only subconsciously did?
Yeah, well, the thing which is interesting, you see, the whole source of my path
Mhm.
was just I was having a normal, ordinary, just whatever. I was, a kid growing up and pretty happy and healthy,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden, just got overwhelmed with deep suffering. And I'm not going to go into the story. I actually, have a book that I wrote about it.
Mhm.
But the suffering was so intense that it stopped me in my tracks, that I couldn't live my life. And that's when I went really inwards and began inquiring into the nature of my mind. And then I got myself in deep trouble because by doing that, I had this profound awakening in which stuff began happening in my life that could only happen in dreams. That was physically impossible.
Mhm.
And particularly when I was around I was beginning to meet, my teachers.
Mhm.
And so it got me in trouble in that, from the mainstream, it looked like I was having a nervous breakdown. And so I got hospitalized and misdiagnosed. And I knew I was having an awakening. I mean, that couldn't have been more clear. So, that's what saved me. I just, not for a
Mhm.
second, I mean, my whole universe, everybody in my world was telling me, oh, you're mentally ill. You're going to need to be on medication the rest of your life. You're in denial of your illness. And I just thought, oh, they're just really stupid. They just don't know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
And so I was fortunate in that I quickly got out of the whole psychiatric thing and continued my awakening and met more of my teachers and
Mhm.
all that. But the point is that anything that spoke to my suffering, that helped me to alleviate my suffering, I wasn't attached to whether it was Buddhism or Christianity or alchemy or shamanism or dreaming or art, or it didn't
Mhm.
make a difference. Anything that had the slightest thread, I would follow.
Mhm.
And then at a certain point, we're talking like 20 years, 30 years later, I began to realize, oh my God, I'm synthesizing these wisdom streams in a way that's my own.
Mhm.
And, and quantum physics was one of them.
Mhm.
So, because all of these threads, they were speaking to something deep in me. And somehow, I had the awareness to follow that. And it was all because the suffering
Mm.
was so overwhelming. And by following that path, it helped me discover my work, and it helped me more become who I am. And it helped me to really connect with the creative spirit inside of me.
Mm. Beautiful. You have in chapter 6, it's entitled Stranger Than Fiction. And you have one of the major challenges of modern physics is to figure out how the seemingly contradictory theories of relativity and quantum mechanics can both coexist in the same universe. Would you expand on that for a minute?
Yeah, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not a physicist, so I can't
Sure.
really go into the real physics of it. But there is something about, when we get attached to a particular perspective
Hmm.
where there's, in the West, we have like the logic, the two-valued logic,
Hmm.
like that things are either true or false, you know? And then the logic in Tibetan Buddhism and in quantum physics is four-valued logic, is things can be both true and false. And
Hmm.
that makes no sense to the conceptual mind that just, that has like duality of, well, things are either true or false. And by being able, and not in a fabricated way, but really getting in touch with that place in our mind that can hold, because my understanding was that there was like the relativity theory and there was quantum physics, and they were really contradictory.
Hmm.
And but one of the things in quantum physics they talk about, the complementary idea that things that are seemingly contradictory can both exist in the same universe. And to
Hmm.
understand that involves this greater, this more expanded consciousness. So now, actually, I just want to segue into something because it's another thing I keep on thinking. Oh, I would not. I don't want to forget
Hmm.
to say this. You see, the implications of when we have the realization that this universe is not objective, okay, that it doesn't exist separate from us, and that the act of observing it actually is having an effect on it. What that means is the implications are just so unbelievable. And here's a succinct, a really easy way to understand that. If I'm identified with an ego, with a separate self, and I have this reference point in third dimensional space and time, the separate self. Well, as a subject, a separate self, I have to have an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. But if all of a sudden there's no object, then what happened to me as a subject? All of a sudden, if I really take in the idea that there's no objective anything out there, then it sheds light on and it puts into question, well, who am I? So you see, the thing about quantum physics is that it's actually promoting itself to become a spiritual path. So that's kind of unbelievable, because here's like the hardest of hardcore science. And by really, following it with integrity, they're actually beginning to shed light on our nature, you know? And that's profound, because when you step out of the separate self and you see through that imagination that we don't exist as separate selves, what do you discover? Well, you discover we exist, we're interconnected with each other, we're interdependent, on each other. And and that then brings in a whole new awareness of who we are. And that instead of us competing against each other, we can actually cooperate with each other. And if I help you, it helps me, because we're not separate. And that's when I made reference to I was having this life transforming awakening in 1981, that I was literally like overwhelmed with seeing that,
Hmm.
with realizing, oh my God, we're dream characters in each other's dream. This is a collective dream.
Hmm.
And by being dream, same thing if you have a dream and now you wake up and you write down the dream and you think, well, what does that dream mean? Well, each of those characters is an embodied reflection of a part of you. So
Sure.
all of us, we're not separate. And that's the expansion of identity, that's expression of having an awakening. And here comes quantum physics, and here's like science, who's basically saying the same thing. Quantum physics is saying the same thing that the Buddha had the realization of 2,500 years ago. I
Mm.
talk about this in the book. And so quantum physics is just doing it in a scientific way, but it's word for word mapping onto what the Buddha was saying.
Mm. It's interesting. I do an exercise in my courses with mentalism and have people take a real scenario that happened to them that day or the day before, and start it with "I had a dream," and write it as if it were a dream. This is something that really happened, and then we interpret it as a dream, just like you said,
That's
as if all
beautiful.
the
That's what
parts.
I tell
Yeah,
my friends to do that all the time. I do that every day. Well, I do that all day.
yeah.
Totally. That's a
It's
beautiful
such a
practice.
profound, it's, I mean,
Yep.
people just, it's so simple and people find it so profound. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's
Totally.
fun. I wonder, our nature, I mean, our real nature, not the ego's nature, but I guess our real nature is the unknown and the unknowable. And we want to, we want to know where our paycheck is coming from. We want to ego, or this, in this world that we're living in, this illusory world, we want to know what we're doing in 3 years, 5 years, who we'll be with in that time, all these things. And so I'm wondering, do you find yourself still wanting, even with this expansion and this consciousness, this level of consciousness, still wanting to feel solid ground under your feet, wanting to find some sense of security, even though that's not really real, while knowing it's still an illusion? And if so, how do you live between those worlds?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you characterize it like that because the way the founding fathers of quantum physics, when they were discovering quantum physics,
Mhm.
they would use the metaphor of it was like the rug had gotten pulled out
Mm,
from under them and there was no place to stand. And so I'm I'm sure I have that part. In Tibetan Buddhism, they'll talk about that. It's the source of suffering is the clinging that we cling either onto an imagined self that doesn't exist in the way we imagine it does, or where we're wanting to cling on to particular certainties in our world.
mm,
But the more, and I'm a work in progress, I'm not any enlightened person at all, but the idea being that the more that I integrate my understanding of what quantum physics is showing us or any of these wisdom traditions, um, the more I actually can just be okay and just have that trust in the dream,
mhm,
and not have to depend on something to hold on to or to cling to or to have floor or have certainty, because it's an incredibly uncertain world. I mean, quantum physics is showing us that. And yeah, and then you just get really, at least for me, my experience is you just get more like at ease in just that mystery and in just the moment, and then
mm,
just trusting that, an example being this conversation today. It's not like I was like preparing and stressing about, oh, what am I going to say or whatever. No, I've learned that if I just really enter into the present moment and be with the person, that whatever they ask, and I had no idea what you were going to ask. I
mm,
didn't even know what we were going to talk about, whether it was this part of my work or it just didn't make any difference to me. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, yeah, just when you really like enter into the present moment, if I need to say something, I've learned that, oh, it'll just fall into my head. And that
mhm.
seems to really be true.
That is, when that becomes normal, that is such a lovely thing, isn't it? When that becomes just the way we are. Um,
Totally. Well, I see with my teachers, because I have these incredible teachers, in Buddhism, or different teachers, and they're so completely relaxed and at ease, like all the time.
mm,
And it's like they've connected with that state, whereas like somebody like me, I go in and out, and I have my stuff and I'm still a work in progress, like the majority of us,
mhm,
where all I can talk about is my experience. When I'm with them, it's totally different. They're just completely at ease and totally relaxed, and just embodying this love and compassion. And yeah, it's really inspiring.
mm. I keep getting this little pop-up that says your internet is unstable. So we're unstable, Paul. I think that's a great metaphor.
Right, right, totally.
On page 84, you say, to quote Heisenberg, and that's Werner Heisenberg, Nobel Prize winner, by getting to smaller and smaller units, we do not come to fundamental units or indivisible units, but we do come to a point where division has no meaning. I could not love that more if it was dipped in chocolate. Can you tell us how you see that as applying to human potential or human experience?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's the hallucination that we're, just if you remember, quantum physics is pointing a quantum system, and this universe is a quantum system.
Mhm.
There's no separate parts. So there's not separate parts interacting. There's not separation anywhere to be found. It's just a whole, it's seamlessly whole.
Mhm.
And but we somehow, I mean, I think it was I think Einstein said something like that the greatest task of our species is to see through the optical, like whatever, like the illusion of that we're separate, of separation.
Mhm.
And so here we are, seamlessly, interconnectedly, interdependently whole, not separate in one iota ever. And yet, the real essence of the malady we've fallen under is that we've put ourselves under a self-created spell, and the spell is that we exist as separate entities.
Mm.
And the more, as soon as I establish myself in that viewpoint of being separate, being like a dream, the whole universe is going to offer me all the evidence confirming, and it becomes, like I was saying before, a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is our own mind.
Mhm.
So the idea being to see through that and to have the recognition that we're all parts of one another, that we,
Mm.
not just in theory, not just in a thought or intellectual, but that who we are, that we're actually cells in a greater organism that depend on each other for our own well-being. That, that's really the point of view in Buddhism, that because I know Buddhism, um, that they really emphasize, to really establish yourself in that point of view. And the expression of that is compassion. Then you have real compassion,
Mm.
not just like this artificial compassion, but there's a real sense of you're really thinking about other people, because other people are not separate from you. They're parts of us.
Mm.
And just imagine a world where more and more of us, catch that bug of the compassion bug,
Right.
and yeah, that would be a different world.
Oh, so true. Um, you mentioned in your book several times that there are no adequate words, to speak about these things, to write about these things, that the further you go, that there just is not, we just don't have the language. I wonder about this because much of what I've discovered in my spiritual journey is that I can only teach maybe 5% of what I've discovered. It's unteachable. And so I can say, here you go, see this, where this takes you. And sometimes people will take it and sometimes they don't. This, saying that about hermetic wisdom is one thing. Saying that about quantum physics, where it requires education, access to laboratories, things like that. I wonder how you reconcile the dilemma of there being no adequate language. Can people find their own discoveries without
Yeah,
benefit of science degrees and things like that?
yeah, yeah, sure. Well, the thing is that I mean, even when the Buddha became enlightened, the idea was, he right away, part of his realization was, oh my God, there's no way I can transmit this with words. That
Mhm.
medium just doesn't translate. And so, it's interesting because one of the things that quantum physics unlocks is the creative spirit. And so the idea being that for us to express what we're having the realization of, and not only what we're having the realization of, but via the process and the act of expressing ourselves, that deepens the very realization that we're trying to express. So I'm describing art, and I'm describing creative activity. That's a new language. So in other words, for each of us to actually just creatively express ourselves, and the way I'm going to express myself is different than the way you express yourself, because on one level we're different.
Mhm.
That actually can really transmit and be a model and activate that same place in other people when they see somebody really embodying and being, just a creative person who's in touch with their agency, with their creative agency. That becomes contagious, So I
Mhm.
would say, and that's not necessarily with words. That might have nothing to do with words.
Right.
And so then that becomes, in a sense, this medium of transmitting this new understanding, and which can go like when, oh, the story, it's like, you know, viral, it goes viral, this realization that we're talking about, like, where we can actually become these activists, these quantum activists,
Mm.
and we're not proselytizing or trying to convince anyone. Because one thing I think a lot about, there's such a collective spell going on with all the propaganda and the lies and the misinformation. And, you just don't know what's true. But then if you think something's true, well, how do you get it across to somebody? But what I've learned is that there's no sense in preaching the light if people's eyes can't see. Okay.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
way a better strategy to teach people the art of seeing. So
Mhm.
that's really interesting. See, because one of the things that quantum physics, I was amazed when I found this out. They were saying, yeah, way more important than finding the right answer is asking the right question, you know?
Mhm.
And so I think that might be one of the things I want to leave your,
Mhm.
people with, is that. And yeah.
Oh, thank you. One last question, and I do want to show your book. It's fabulous. Awakeninthedream.com is your website. I know your book is available everywhere. Do you prefer they order it from your website?
Or Amazon, just
Okay.
anywhere. I'm not really attached, but thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Um, are you hopeful, Paul, for the future?
Yeah. Oh, because I'm very quantum physicized,
Mhm.
in the core of my being. Um, because part of my other work, I've written books about this, is the profound importance of having open eyes towards evil and seeing the darkness, and that if you just turn a blind eye, then you're unwittingly strengthening the evil that you're looking away from. So I have very open eyes, and I study a lot about what's happening. And it's very frightening what's happening in our world and the evil that's playing out all over the planet. And that being said, I'm incredibly optimistic too.
Mm.
It's like somehow I've developed a capacity in myself to hold those opposites.
Mhm.
And because I can talk about the optimism in a lot of ways. I don't want to get overly optimistic, because that also feeds the evil. If
Sure.
you talk a lot of new age people going, oh, God's in charge and everything's fine, well, they're deluded, they're
Mhm.
disassociating from the horror of it.
Mhm.
But to really see the evil and to feel the trauma of it, because we're all in trauma
Mhm.
with what's playing out, and to keep connection with our light, with our open heart, with our consciousness being expanded, and to understand the incredible, unimaginable, vast power that each of us have as creative agents, and to realize that so many of us are awakening, and particularly when we hook up with others of us who are awakening, and then, like I was saying, we can help each other to deepen that realization. That inspires incredible, optimism or hope in a really good way. um, so yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Mm, wonderful, wonderful way to end. It's been such a treat to be with you. I think you're coming back when we can get that scheduled to talk about your book, Dispelling Watiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. I'm very excited about that.
Great.
Those who are watching or listening now, click subscribe below and you'll get notifications of that and other interviews. And visit Paul again at awakeninthedream.com, where you can order his book, The Quantum Revelation. Paul, thanks again so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Everybody, we'll see you next time.